This is the Authentic Change Podcast, and I am Mike Horne. Authenticity reflects what we want from each other and our organizations: open communication, trust, community, fun, and opportunity. I want to help you to do your best in your personal and professional relationships. This podcast delivers expertise, insights, and approaches on authentic leadership, to live your purpose, to lead from your values, to establish connected relationships, to steward people and culture change, to build and sustain prosperity, and to open doors and possibilities. This podcast will assist you in paving the way forward to personal, team, and organizational prosperity. Welcome to another episode of Authentic Change with Mike Horne. I am absolutely delighted to be with Jim Young today. Jim has, in his professional title, one that I don't think you'll come across very often, and that is Jim describes himself as a men's burnout coach. And when I first met Jim several months ago in our pre-show preparations, I was intrigued by his work and what he does. And he frequently works with millennial tech CEO dads and any variation of those traits as well. What's usually going on for people is burnout. They find him because he's a burnout survivor. He's a highly experienced coach. He has spent thousands of hours training on relationships, and he cares about helping to eliminate burnout from your life. And he has guides and tips and suggestions, and I'm sure some proven success stories about all of that. So, Jim, welcome to Authentic Change. I, again, am so glad you're here. Can you say a few words about yourself? How would you describe yourself to our audience?
Thanks a lot, Mike. It's a pleasure to be here. I've really enjoyed listening to your show in the past and excited to be able to talk about my own authentic change and share a little bit of my story. The way that you described me is pretty accurate. I've been a coach for several years after leaving the corporate world, where I experienced a ton of burnout. I had burnout in my personal life as well. And it's really become my cause or my passion. And in the past year, I've really made that transition to say, this is the work that I'm called to do, and building communities of men, doing work one-on-one with men, and just helping us through what I like to think of as the other pandemic that's been going on for a lot longer and doesn't have a vaccine.
And what would you call that pandemic? Is that the pandemic of burnout, Jim?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think it's been with us for a long time.
How do you describe it? I mean, is it a stress condition? Is it a condition that has multiple components? Or how do you describe burnout? Maybe that's a place for us to start, and then we can take that into the world of being yourself and what that means for leadership. But how do you describe burnout, Jim?
Yeah, I rely on the common definition. Dr. Christine Maslach, sort of the pioneer in defining the field of burnout from a clinical perspective. And her research and her colleagues' research point to three things: exhaustion, and that can be physical, mental, emotional; cynicism, that sense of, man, it's never going to get better. I can't get out of this. And what often corresponds with those other two is this sense of a lack of efficacy or productivity, not being able to get the job done. I'm a baseball player from way back, and it's like, I just don't have my fastball anymore. I can't reach back and throw one by the hitter. Like, something is off. So that's the classical definition: exhaustion, cynicism, and lack of productivity. And there are parts of burnout that are talked about in the scientific or academic community that I don't necessarily agree with. The WHO, World Health Organization, says that burnout is a workplace issue. And yes, I agree that it is largely driven by the workplace, but I think it's so much bigger than that. So my work really focuses on what is the sense of burnout that you have across your life, in your workplace, with your partner or spouse, as a parent, in your other social relationships. All of those components, to me, can feed into those three, really big symptoms.
Boy, so interesting. And I suspect that there are no shortage of people who don't at least manifest one of those three frameworks, either the exhaustion, the lack of productivity, or the cynicism. And we can take that in so many directions, Jim. And I wonder, as we unpack and explore what it means to lead authentically, what it means to live authentically, those seem like three things that could really get in your way of bringing more of who you are to what you do. In fact, they seem like a recipe for bringing less of who you are to what you do. What do you think about that?
Yeah, my experience with my own burnout, as you mentioned in the intro, consider myself a burnout survivor. And what I recognized in my process of healing, recovering from my own burnout, was that so much of it was the defenses that I had put up, the masks that I was wearing, the armor I'd put on, whatever metaphor you want to use, where I was not showing up authentically. I wasn't honoring my own needs. I was just going in and doing the work that I thought I needed to do as a leader and burning myself out in the process, because I think there wasn't enough me in there. I was trying to, hold something up that just wasn't really me.
That's a huge insight to have, Jim, that you were showing up but not bringing yourself to the situation as a leader. What were some of the clues that you had, or what were some of the insights?
So coming back to those symptoms, there were years where I felt exhausted and I just couldn't quite get a sense of, like, why am I in this fog? I can't seem to really get the job done. I wasn't being effective with the clients that I was servicing. I was having a hard time managing my teams. And I would go through these stretches where I just felt like I was literally in a fog and knew that, something was off, but I just had no idea. I couldn't put my finger on it. I was working really hard. And maybe that should have been a sign, was that I kept putting in more time. I kept putting in more energy and effort, and just getting this diminishing set of returns.
Isn't that interesting? I mean, more time, more energy, all resulting in fog.
Yeah. Yeah. It was maddening too, because I saw my peers working hard. I thought, this is what I'm supposed to do. I think it's a message that we're conditioned to, men, maybe in particularly, but I think women as well, that, we're a work hard society. And if you work hard, you get ahead. And boy, I just kept running into the wall. I kept thinking, man, what am I doing wrong here?
And what did you discover in that process? I've got to ask.
Yeah, for me, the process really took several years. And I think one of the main things that I learned, in part because it took me several years, is that I was just trying to figure it all out. I was trying to use my brain. I'm a smart guy. I can figure out lots of stuff. I was trying to figure out this problem that I'd never even named. I wasn't talking with anybody else about it. I was just trying to continue, showing up looking like I had it all together. And on the inside, I was melting down. And so I think some of the key takeaways were, I had to get clear about what the problem was, what was amiss between what I wanted and needed and my reality. And I needed to share that with other people, because I didn't have all the answers. And what I've come to believe about burnout is we can't possibly come up with all the answers from inside our own head.
Right. So where are the sources where we might turn for this? My coaches, yeah.
Yeah, coaches for sure. My big answer on this one is actually community. And it almost doesn't matter what community. Community on its own is going to have benefit. I think there are certain communities that can be helpful. So it might be a mastermind group of peers who have the same situation as you. They're in my case of my common client, they're a CEO, they're a dad, they're dealing with these twin pressures of running a business and running a family. And, finding a group that can empathize with you, that can provide you other perspective, that can hold you accountable, that can challenge you. And then certainly, as you mentioned, working with a coach. I'm a coach, so caveat there, of course. I have a little bit of a bias, but I've worked with coaches over the years, and it's been invaluable to me to have that space where I can be listened to, I can be challenged to ask questions of myself that I wouldn't otherwise answer. So a lot of it is those outside places where we get perspective on the problem.
Jim, and you just had a birthday. I mean, I think you've turned 52. That's public knowledge. It's out there on the
51.
51. I'm sorry, 51.
That's okay.
So you've just turned 51.
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
And you've got the 51 life lessons that you've described. And I thought it's a very poignant piece of work. And among those lessons, you've got some great things in there about commitment and surrender and their relationship to love, being an expert on yourself, leaders being rather than doing. And any of these are rich concepts to explore in terms of authentic leadership. But I'd like to start with being expert on yourself, because so much of what I describe in authentic leadership is bringing who you are to what you do, bringing your best. And sometimes I know it's difficult at times to uncover our best, right? As we strip away the layers, consider our responsibilities, and look at our own accountabilities. But when you think about this, about being an expert on yourself, what's that mean for you?
For me, that's been a huge part of my own human development in my 40s and 50s, that I spent a lot of time just going along to get along, following the path that was laid out for me, never really thinking about myself, and honestly lacking a lot of self-awareness. I reached my early 40s 10 years ago, pretty in the dark about who I was, and probably in some ways arrogant and ignorant. And those were really not serving me. And that, those kind of led to the crash that brought me into burnout. And so I've spent so much time over the last 10 years really just getting to know myself. And that's taken a number of different shapes, whether that's through journaling on a regular basis and just writing out my thoughts. I've spent time in a 12-step program in Al-Anon. That was a huge part of my own learning about life principles and who I was in relation to those. Changing my career and going into a field that I felt passionate about wouldn't have come about without me doing the self-awareness work to understand what made me tick.
And all of that requires, I'm wondering, I mean, did it require, was there a catalytic event? Or were there, was it more like a stream flowing into a river, or flowing into a larger body of water? I mean, was it a buildup, or was there a cataclysmic event?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm glad you asked that. For me, and I think for a lot of folks who end up in burnout, it's a cataclysmic event. For me, it was the end of my marriage, which I didn't expect. I didn't necessarily see coming. And it was really devastating for me. I'm a passionate dad. It's one of my favorite jobs. It's the favorite job I'll ever have. And I was terrified when that event happened, because I thought I would lose that part of my life in a very meaningful way. And I think I've talked with several other coaches who work on burnout. They all happen to be women, but one of them mentioned to me, she said, I don't think there's such a thing as burnout prevention, because I don't think people see it coming. I think you have to go over the cliff first. And so it's really about burnout recovery. And I'd love to skin that cat, because I'd like more people to avoid the pain of going through a period of time like that. And, starting to do self-awareness work and recognizing for ourselves, where's the heat getting too hot for me? What can I not withstand in the long term? You talk about building and sustaining prosperity in our lives. And I don't think we can do that if we don't have the awareness of what's sustainable for us and what isn't, if we don't get honest about that.
Yeah, I can't remember. Is it in The Little Red Balloon, The Little Prince? I don't remember a bit about going to the edge and taking a leap, or jumping, or flying. And perhaps that was this cataclysmic event that triggered. And I guess there are several pathways that those events lead to. They can lead to a more destructive inner journey, a more productive inner journey, which we would hope for and intend for everyone. Um,
I love that, because that frames that idea of a cliff
mhm.
in a richer way. And I think I've had the experience in the last several years of leaping off the cliff and growing wings. I do improv comedy as a side gig, and it's really fun. And one of the things we learn there is to jump out of the airplane and build our parachute on the way down, because it's a joyride. It doesn't have to be the terror of a free fall. And so how do we do that? How do we build the skills where we know how to build a parachute when all of a sudden the plane isn't there anymore?
So, Jim, how do you begin to describe authenticity in your work and uh, for yourself as well?
The first place I go to is a definition I heard years ago from somebody I found very wise. And they simply said that authenticity is having your head, your heart, and your body in the same place at the same time. That I am not disjointed in some way where, in my work career, a lot of the inauthenticity is my head and my body were there. I was bringing my cognitive abilities, I was physically present, and yet my heart wasn't in the work. It wasn't something that I really cared about. It wasn't bringing something into my life that I felt fulfilled by. And so when I can find that place where the way I'm using my brain and my mind is in service to what my heart says, and I'm putting my full body, and I mean the full embodied experience of doing my work into it, that to me is authenticity. And I think it requires all three of those components.
Right. It requires head, heart, and body. Such a rich description for bringing ourselves to authenticity. I typically think about authenticity as congruency, that our words and actions match, and even better if our thoughts, words, and actions match, right? To avoid going through the motions. What that doesn't necessarily incorporate, unless you take a very large view of, that category of thoughts and mindfulness, then you might, start to sync up the heart work as well.
Yeah.
But it is a rather clinical perspective. I mean, to think about words and actions and thoughts, and you bring heart into it. How does the heart, brim over? How does it get depleted in this work, or what's the charge for it?
Yeah, I think our hearts get depleted when we don't pay them any heed. And a lot of my work with men has shown me that there's been so much conditioning that tells men to turn off your heart, to turn off your emotions, to turn off your feelings. They're dangerous, they're weak, they're not going to get you where you want to go. And I fully disagree. I think the way that we connect our heart and bring it into the process is to give ourselves the room to actually feel. I said in that 51 lessons learned list for my birthday recently, that strong leadership oftentimes is a lot more about being than doing. And what I mean there is being able to sit with things and feel them and set intentions about the kinds of feelings you want to generate. I make every once in a while, instead of making a to-do list, I make a to-be list. I say, how do I want to be in this encounter? I want to be open. I want to be passionate. I want to be, respectful, whatever those things might be. It starts to create, it brings my heart into the equation. It really makes the relationship come alive.
Do you think your to-be list is as frequent or as your to-do list, or is it interchangeable, or would I forget the to-do list altogether?
I'd love to say that it's as frequent as my to-do list, but my get stuff done personality means that the to-do list is usually ahead. When I'm at my best, I'm merging the two. So it's not that I put down the to-do list so that I can just sit in a meditation posture and be in my to-be list. It's really when I combine the two that I'm at my best. So I want to be a certain way in the act of doing my work. So I want to be compassionate in this conversation that I need to have with somebody that I know is going to be difficult. I can check both of those things off at the same time. And it's, again, I think it's about that alignment, that authenticity of, am I being the person that I want to be? Not just the person I am today, but the person that I'm growing towards in my interactions, because that's when the rubber meets the road. the doing is where we get to be ourselves.
And in terms of, head, heart, and body, or words, actions, and thoughts,
Mhm.
as people, as men begin to move through their search for bringing more of who they are to what they do, does it always require a catalytic event? Or can it really be sort of the drip, drip, drip that leads to evolution, that leads to change, that leads to transformation?
I absolutely think there's a range. There are going to be people who will come to it slowly, and some people who need to maybe bottom out. I mean, in my case, it was the latter. And really, ultimately, it comes down to, I think, two key principles that I hold in high esteem in my life. One is willingness. Do I have willingness to look at my life differently and be willing to change? And do I have awareness? Can I have self-awareness? Can I gain awareness from other people? And starts to call in some other principles like humility. I'm willing to really look at, my positives and my negatives.
So willingness and awareness, or awareness and willingness, I mean, as two fundamental approaches to beginning an exploration. I would suspect that there are many people who are unable to do that easily.
Mm-hmm.
That, to your earlier points about doing, right? We get caught up in our doing, that our awareness, awareness has to be coupled if it's to be productive. It has to be accompanied with some energy, right? I think that's what the Gestalt psychologists would say, is that we can be aware, but do we have the energy to, move through this, to bring focus to it, to separate it from its field?
Mm-hmm.
How do you think that begins to happen in your work, or what do you see in clients and in this move towards authenticity?
Yeah, I think that awareness can be super uncomfortable. I think when we start to realize that we've been following somebody else's script, we start to ask ourselves, well, why am I doing that? And oftentimes some really, really uncomfortable stuff can come up, like shame or guilt. I'm doing things because I feel like I have to, or I'm afraid that if I don't reach the top of the corporate ladder, for example, I will be ridiculed. I won't measure up. I won't be blank enough, rich enough, smart enough, good enough. And I think that can be a really challenging hurdle to get over, is that place of, I've got this awareness. I might have it even before I start to think about it, because I have the low level anxiety or the high level stress, my clenching my jaw, I've gained some weight, I'm drinking too much, right? There are symptoms going on. When we get to the awareness of what's sitting underneath that, then there's something even below that that's usually the much harder thing to get to, because it's the big story about us that gets really personal. It can feel like, man, I don't know how to go there. I'm a little bit afraid of that.
Yeah, and specifically, how does this work for men? I mean, I think, as you've stated, who are in many ways accustomed to seeing success as climbing,
Mm-hmm.
as moving up, whether that's usually a vertical ladder of some sort. But when people don't necessarily choose that path and look for fulfillment in other ways, is it possible to have it all? I mean, to avoid and turn away from burnout and move fully to richness?
I definitely think so. I think you have to define that for yourself. And that's
Right.
where, I try never to be prescriptive, because I really don't know what somebody's needs are. If we take climbing the ladder, which oftentimes relates to status,
Right.
financially or professionally, the question that I always get interested about and curious about is, in service of what? So are you trying to accumulate a lot of wealth so that you can have big, shiny things and feel good about yourself because of your belongings? Or is there something else that's in service to? And does that feel authentic? And I also don't think either one of those is necessarily wrong. Like, you have to enjoy the life that you get. And how are you, contributing as a leader, as a member of your family? Oftentimes, and this might be a little bit morbid, but it's an exercise that I use in coaching sometimes, is I'll have people spend time thinking about their eulogy as they're trying to get a handle on what's their purpose. So what is my purpose? Why am I striving for this ladder, this role in an organization, for example? And if we flash forward and say, let's pretend you're listening to your eulogy, what are people talking about? Are they talking about you being, the fastest person to executive vice president in your organization? Or are they talking about the quality of the relationships that you had? Are they talking about both of those things? What's in the mix for you so that you can define what is that success? And then we can get to that richness of like, okay, cool. You know what you want and you know why you want it. So now you can authentically pursue it.
Right. And I would imagine that when we're in these sort of states, that we do have, that it fosters open communication, that it fosters trust, that it fosters openness. And not only do these apply to our personal relationships, but the application to our professional lives is robust as well.
Yeah, I commented to you in one of our exchanges that those values some of which you just espoused around open communication and trust, community, fun, opportunity. These are things that I hold dear as well. And once we've tapped into those, that's why one of the first things that I do, whether it's in a one-on-one setting with clients or in groups that I run, is to help people connect to their values. If you know your values, you have, I think, the single biggest foundation that you need for being authentic and living that authentic life, because you can now use that as a decision matrix. I run major decisions about my life, and sometimes relatively minor ones, through my list of values. If the answer is not obvious to me, I check down through my list of values and I say, can I honor who I want to be by saying yes to this? And if not, I say no, or I start to have a negotiation.
Boy, so important, right? Yeah, because values are selective. So it is that process of defining and understanding your values. And I would imagine not having shame associated with those. The values that I think I work from in terms of authentic leadership, in terms of developing organizations where people can do their teams and organizations where people can do their best work, is a set of humanistic values, respect for everyone, find dignity in each situation, and the idea that everyone deserves to be loved.
Yeah. Amen.
And you talk about this in some of your reflections around commitment and surrender being important to love. And how might guys think about that in terms of work settings in particular, right? It took me a long time to, think about these concepts. I often, described it earlier in my career as warmth, and for some people, I might go to affection before bringing up the L word in terms of work and relationships.
That's another ladder to climb, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, so I think about leadership, and the other big L word of love. I mean, that's the pinnacle to me, is how do we create a loving organization? I don't think that those are mutually exclusive at all. In fact, I think that when we're able to bring in concepts like warmth or affection or appreciation or even love into our work setting, then we start to open up all of these other avenues. And leaders who can demonstrate that and can say, hey, what we're after is to create this place where you get to show up as a full human being. You don't have to hide yourself. We value you for who you are because we respect everybody. And that doesn't mean that everybody is always a fit. I'm a huge, huge proponent of values. And when leaders get clear about these are the values for this organization, we can now start to create a culture that lives through those values, where people are brought in who match those values. And there are 7.6 billion of us on the planet, right? We're not all going to have the same values. There are people who share our values. And when we can be working off of that same basic set, then I think we can access those places where we can have those interactions that feel more loving.
Well, and perhaps that's what, spurs our conversations today about community versus culture, and how we, how despite many people not having face-to-face interactions over the last 18 months, there's still a lot of bad management. People experience it, they feel it, even in, Zoom or other electronically mediated environments. And I'm wondering, Jim, as we, unfortunately, have to begin to wrap up soon. Not quite yet, but I'm wondering, are there any key lessons given your work in burnout and with men's groups? And I'd like to ask one question here.
Sure.
Just as, you begin to think about some of those key lessons or key takeaways. Some people might say, I might say, wow. Men have these issues. The thing of succeeding at work. I'd say, well, that applies to people of any gender, right? How they want to be successful at work.
Yep.
The desire and the feel to be successful. But women often have the added burden of all the other, home, children, if they're involved, community, that sometimes men don't feel. How do you address that, or do you think about it at all, or?
Only all the time. So one other part of my own personal story that relates here is I'm a divorced dad of 3 kids, and I have my kids half the time. And so I understand the circumstances that women have largely had foisted upon them for forever, is this expectation that they will do all the nurturing. And then now in more recent times, that they'll also go out and be a provider. For men, the reason I do this work, the work that I do with men, is because I feel like we're so out of balance. Right? There's this old archetype that says that our job is to be the protector and the provider. And it's really, as a good friend of mine wrote in his book, Reinventing Masculinity, it's this confined masculinity. We're really trapped. We don't get to bring our heart out, as I was referencing earlier. And so how do we liberate ourselves from that? And it's, to me, burnout is a symptom of being confined into this small set of duties that are okay for men, when really we want to do all of those things. We want to provide financially for our family, but we also want to provide care. We want to have healthy friendships, and so many men don't have any meaningful friendships. And so for me, the game is about creating balance for individuals, for organizations, for families, masculine, feminine, men, women. And because I was born into this shell as a straight white male in America, I have one perspective that I know I can speak to. So that's, my aim is to try and help other guys say, hey, you can do all those things that you want. You can have that balance across your life. What's going to be required for you to make those shifts? And they're not going to be easy.
Right. Yeah. So important as we think about the move to bring more of who we are to what we do, to bring our best to every situation, requires often this confidence in yourself. And that's usually formed on a firmer footing when we understand where the foundation is, I think.
Yeah, that confidence piece is a huge one. And for me, it's been one of my bigger uphill climbs in the last several years, was to be confident enough to say, I get to be who I am.
Yeah.
I was a shy kid who then put on armor when I realized that my sensitivities did not play well on the playground or in the locker room or in college or in the work world. So I kept putting on these layers to protect that soft inner core. And I couldn't be confident because I wasn't being myself. I wasn't being authentic. So for me, my authentic change was really to come back to who I always was and be confident enough that that was fine. And that not everybody would get it or agree with it, and I'd still be fine.
Right. Yeah. So important. What I try to bring to every coaching situation is that sense of confidence. I have a sense of who I am, of where I've been, hopefully what I'm doing now, and where I'm headed. I also bring competence, right? A set of, and finally, hopefully a sense of calm to every situation. Storm in the harbor, calm seas to launch the ship. however we want to think about that mastery. And
those three C's are great for leaders, right? Confidence, competence, and calm. I think we all look to our leaders for that. And how can we best be, in those three C's? I think a lot of it is about authenticity.
Jim, your story is absolutely fascinating, as is your work. And how would our listeners go about getting in touch with you if they wanted to? What are some of the ways for people to get in touch with you?
The primary way to find me is through my website, thecenteredcoach.com. Pretty much any way that you might want to reach out to me, you can access from there, whether that's LinkedIn or via email. And a lot of my story is up there, and all the services that I offer to help men in the world. So that's really the way.
And Jim can be found at The Centered Coach. Put the in thecenteredcoach.com. And that's the US spelling, I think, CENTERED, Centered
Yes.
Coach, right?
Thank you, Mike.
And so it's just such a great story on yourself. And Jim, what I'm wondering as well is why the Centered Coach? We've got half a moment of that, combining all of your interests and activities.
Yeah, it came from a visioning exercise that I did through a mentor of mine, Ari Weinswag, years ago, where I was writing about what I wanted for my career. And what I wrote in this exercise was to help people find the calm, centered place from which they do their best in work and life. And after reading those words back to myself, I knew what my purpose was to start to shift my work into that area. So that's how I got the name.
That's fabulous, Jim Young. It's been such a delight to have Jim Young as a guest on Authentic Change with Mike Horne. You can reach Jim Young at thecenteredcoach.com. You'll find a way to access him through that site to be in touch with Jim. And who wouldn't want to be in touch with Jim on this? Jim, I really appreciate all of your insights, the guidance, the work that you're doing on helping people, particularly men, create this more authentic life so that we can bring more of who we are and at least claim our identities for the service of others and for the service of ourselves. So thank you so much, Jim.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on today, Mike. It was really a pleasure, and I'm really grateful for the work you're doing.
Great to have Jim as a guest. Please reach out to him at thecenteredcoach.com. And again, until the next episode of Authentic Change with Mike Horne, stay well. Thanks for listening, and I hope you'll subscribe today and tell a friend about our show. If you're looking for hands-on help to increase your success through authentic change, or have a question you'd like to hear me answer here, please email me at mike@mike-horne.com.